Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session, Fraud Prevention Reimagined, Balancing Security and CX. My name is Angelica Lunad, and I am a Senior Events Marketing Manager here at CallMiner. And today I am joined by Megan Kipe, Product Marketing Manager at CallMiner, and our good friend, Connor White, President of Strategic Initiatives at Daon. Connor and Megan are going to explore some of the best practices to combat fraud in this digital age of AI.
Thanks, Angelica, and welcome everyone. I see Denver, Colorado in the chat, Florida in the chat, and even the Philippines. So welcome and thanks for joining. So first, I want to provide a quick introduction to CallMiner for those who are not familiar with us, and then I'll invite Connor to do the same. So CallMiner, we are a CX automation company. We are a CX automation platform that combines intelligence with automation to augment human agents, giving human agents superpowers, if you will, ultimately improving the customer experience while reducing operational costs. So with that, I'll invite Connor to tell you a little bit about Daon.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Megan, first of all, and Angelica. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. So I'll start by saying it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate that, 30 to 45 minutes of your time is a gift. And so we'll try and use it wisely in terms of some of the things we'll share. So a little bit about Daon. Daon is a 25-year-old company. Some of you may have heard of us. Some of you probably haven't. But I'm certain that most people, certainly in the United States and in Asia and Europe, are using our product today. They just don't know it. There's a good probability, that your pension system, your 401k, your banking application, even the contact center you call into is actually using Daon technology. And so we are very proud to serve our customers. We have customers on every continent. And like I said, we're 25 years old, privately held, which is and self-funding and profitable. That means that we're not actually, our customers are our focus, not the next PE VC call, right? And that helps differentiate us in the market because we really are driven by customer satisfaction, and that it kind of drives everything we do. In terms of size, our systems manage about 2 billion customer identities a day, and we do about 250 million authentications a day across the world, depending on the channel, whether it's mobile, desktop, mobile app, call center. Some of our customers have very demanding requirements. One of them actually requires up to 4,000 concurrent transactions per second peak times. And we deliver that. And our focus is on the truth, ensuring that there's truth in the conversation in terms of people and organizations. So ensuring that it's a real person in the interaction and it's the right person involved in the interaction. And that's whether it's a contact center, whether it's a mobile or web app, as I said, or even in some cases in person. And we do that by putting the human back in the transaction, making sure it's you and you are unique, and ensuring that as you interact with the organization, as people interact with our organizations and organizations interact with their customers, there's a trust that's built there. And we call that the trust dividend. Because we have that trust, we combine those transactions to the trusted endpoints, we can optimize the journey for the individual as they engage. Next slide, please. So how do we do that? So we call it identity continuity. And that's about putting the customer at the center of all interactions. So we enable our customers to deploy an identity-centric approach to their business, a consistent view of the users across all interactions. And this leads, so we call it identity continuity, as I've mentioned, but it actually leads to what I like to call identity intelligence, optimized experiences for both the end user, i.e. minimal friction, maximal service, and the organization, improve net promoter scores, reduce costs, for example, in the case of a call center, call handling time, and reduce fraud. So there's a win-win for both sides when you actually put the human back in the loop and make sure it's a real human and the right human. And our customers appreciate it. So you'll see here on the right-hand side of the screen, I've put in 2 screenshots of social media from real customers of Daon posting about the capabilities that our solution provides. It doesn't really talk about our tech, but it talks about the outcome to the consumer, right? They're able to increase the monetary transfer that's made. They're able to get their service handled much quicker. These are important things for organizations because in the digital age, we need to serve our customers. They have an expectation of being able to be served quicker with minimal friction, and that's what we do. So Next slide, please. And I'm going through this pretty quickly, just in the interest of time, because I know we've got a lot of, Megan, some questions and some conversation we want to have. I would say, finally, that because what's really important about what we do is we recognize that one size does not fit all. It's not all about a single type of authentication. We call them modalities, whether it's voice, face. We authenticate based on the customer context, based on the transaction context. So we're able to do risk scoring on a transaction and say, okay, to get the level of assurance I need for this interaction with Megan, I have these elements I can use real quickly that don't inconvenience her, but get me the level of trust I need to service her quickly. And be that face, be it voice, be it device signaling, be it network signaling, be it passkeys. You're familiar with probably with FIDO and passkeys. We can combine the call center when they call in the actual call with, for example, other assets the user may have from the organization, like a mobile app, to do step-up authentication that takes about 3 to 4 seconds, as opposed to a lot of KBA, knowledge-based authentication back and forward. So we can optimize these experiences by bringing a full arsenal of intelligence about that person to the transaction. Hopefully that explains it very quickly. And we do it across all these channels, whether it's, as I said, be it kiosk-based in a lobby, be it face-to-face in a branch, contact center, people calling in, mobile smart apps, and desktop applications, and so
on. Awesome. Thanks, Connor. And I should mention as well, we just came off of a couple of weeks ago now, our annual Listen event. We call it Listen at CallMiner. It's our annual customer conference, and Daon was there as a sponsor, had a booth, and I know you had some great conversations as well.
Yeah, no, it was actually, I'm glad you brought it up, Megan. It was excellent. It was a really great conference. We got to interact with a lot of organizations who really, first of all, they love the CallMiner tech, as do we. But they really have some interesting use cases, and I sat in on some of the sessions, and some of the AI-enabled things that you're doing, I found fascinating, coming from an AI background myself. It really is a fascinating time in the industry. We're going to talk about this as we go through it, but the level of the way that AI is changing the experience, right, from and the capabilities of the organization and the person, the end user, and the fraudster is fascinating. And there were some really interesting sessions that you guys ran as part of that conference that I thought were absolutely superb. So well done.
Yeah, and I got to hear about the koala. Sorry, it's hard to see. Let me see if I can get it. My camera. Yeah. There we go.
There you go. So that's our Daon mascot. And it's not because we have deployments in Australia. We actually do quite a few. It's because we'll talk about deep fakes later on, but people don't realize that koalas can deep fake humans. And what I mean by that is a koala, all sorts of animals have different biometric features. People don't realize that a koala has fingerprints. Okay, and if I had time, I could share slides. I won't bore everybody, but it's a fun fact that koala fingerprints are almost indistinguishable from human fingerprints. They're probably the closest to human fingerprints. And they're not a bear, it's a marsupial, as people keep correcting me. But I can show you pictures of, we've actually had cases where I've stood in front of trained fingerprint examiners and I've shown them koala bear prints and human prints, and most often they'll get it wrong without realizing, because they are so similar to human prints. So the original deep fake was a koala. So
love it. I love that fact. I didn't know that before. So that was something I learned at our Listen conference. So I'm going to take a moment before we get into the fireside chat portion of the conversation, just talk for a second about how Daon and CallMiner work together to make customer interactions both secure and insightful. So as Connor said, Daon provides biometric identity verification, such as voice authentication, to confirm callers quickly and securely, while CallMiner analyzes the content of those interactions to uncover things like customer sentiment, detect issues, and ensure compliance. So combined, they enable contact centers to prevent fraud, streamline authentication, and improve the overall customer experience. All right, so with that, we'll get into the chat portion of the webinar. So kind of how this will work next is I have 3 sections, if you will. So we'll go through each section here. I'll ask Connor some questions, and then I also have some Ask the Audience questions built in, so you'll have the chance to chime in. So for the first question, Connor, how have fraud tactics and patterns evolved in contact centers over the past few years? And what are the most concerning trends that you're seeing now?
Sure, thank you. So I guess what bothers me most when I look at the fraud landscape over the past few years is how dramatically the attack surface has changed and expanded. We've moved from relatively simple social engineering attacks, simple tactics, to very highly sophisticated AI-powered attacks that are frankly quite alarming, right? And so what's particularly concerning is the sophistication of these attacks. We're seeing fraudsters who essentially industrialized their operations, right? They're running what I call fraud farms, organizations that systematically mine interactive voice response systems for customer data. They make multiple reconnaissance calls to gather intelligence and then strike with great precision. I think last year the FTC reported that fraud losses hit almost 13 billion and representing about a 38 to 40%, if memory serves, that jump from the previous year, who reported fraud where they actually lost money. Okay. And then the FBI, I think, has talked close to, I think they logged about almost 900,000 complaints. And they talk about, I think, 16 billion fraud losses in 2024, depending on which report you read. So huge jumps. And what's a very alarming trend is the convergence of multiple attack vectors. You know, fraudsters aren't just calling a call center anymore. They're combining voice attacks with data breaches, social media reconnaissance, AI-generated content. And they're studying agent behaviors, call center agent behaviors, identifying the exact psychological triggers that work, and then scaling these attacks across multiple contact centers simultaneously. And we'll talk later on about, you know, when we actually replace the human with an AI and a bot, how that scale goes even more exponential. And so what that kind of keeps you up at night, that, you know, I read a recent report that 60% of fraud in financial services, for example, can be traced back to the call center at some point. That's kind of scary, right? Yet many organizations still rely on authentication methods that were designed for what I like to call the pre-AI era, right? The, you know, knowledge-based authentication. We need to stop asking for your mother's maiden name or the last 4 years social or your first pet or where you went to high school, because that data has all been, people have published it themselves on social media, but then we've had some organizations that have collected it and actually put it all into one database and been attacked and given that data out. So it's bad data to use, and I know it's easy for our customers, we think, but it actually is not a very good solution, and it's pre-AI, as I said, pre-AI, and AI just takes that stuff and destroys it as a authentication factor. And so that's what I think are the biggest concerns I'd have right now, and where I see the biggest change.
Wow. So it seems like, just to summarize, you know, fraudsters are getting more efficient at what they do, and they're also getting faster, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And it's going to get faster and faster, as we'll talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So Connor, what vulnerabilities within contact center workflows specifically are most frequently exploited? And then you talked about like traditional security measures, like pre-AI verification. So, you know, why do traditional security measures like those fail to stop them?
Yeah, no, I think it's this is really the heart of the problem, Megan. Contact centers have a fundamental vulnerability that's built right into their DNA. They're designed to help you, right? The contact center exists to help you solve a problem, right? And fraudsters exploit exactly that. So I think the most exploited vulnerability is what I like to call the empathy gap, right? Agents are trained to be helpful, to resolve issues quickly, and to provide excellent customer service. And fraudsters weaponize these very qualities. They create artificial urgency, a crying baby in the background. I was listening in with one of our customers to a fraudulent call, and it's clearly fraudulent, but you could hear this baby crying in the background because they're trying to create this thing that they're under pressure. And I can almost imagine, you know, the old style DJ with his deck and, you know, hit baby crying, hit train noise, hit like, you know, car honking, and they have the tools to do this, right? You know, a sick family member coughing, you know, and I need to get my account, I need immediate attention, please help me, kind of thing. So they play on human psychology, and they use authority, fear, and empathy to manipulate these agents into bypassing security protocols. And we see that more and more. And like, you know, there's some specific techniques that we're seeing, right? Firstly, there's a reconnaissance call, right? A fraudster will call multiple times. They're not trying to break in every time. They're gathering small pieces of information from different agents, right? One call gets them an address confirmation. Another one might get them some recent account activity. A third gets them past a security question, right? And it's kind of like hill climbing. They're going up a little bit further every time, and each individual interaction seems innocuous, right? But at the end of the day, they're collectively building a very complete profile. They're validating the profile of the person they're trying to impersonate, but they're also validating the processes and the techniques being used and how to bypass them, what works to get past the agent and the firm in question. People don't realize this, but our research shows that frequent, unusual call frequency, for example, multiple calls in a very short time from a number is actually one of the strongest red flags for fraud, right? You know, over a course of, like, say, 4 hours, if the same number calls in 8 times or 10 times, right? It's unlikely that they're having a genuine problem. They're actually trying to get more and more information on each call, right? So, yeah. Secondly, we're seeing sophisticated social engineering where fraudsters impersonate authority figures. They'll say, "I could have you fired." Like, you know, a lot of our customers are very concerned about the C-suite calling in, impersonating C-suite, and then making a business decision or compromising some specific credentials, right? So they can gain access, enter the organization, go laterally. We see that with a lot of our organizations with DevOps people or security people as well. A lot of the attacks are not in the front door; they're in the back door through the contact center or something else, and they gain enough information to then come in and laterally go across the organization into the digital side of the organization. And so that's another security threat that we're seeing more and more of. So it's not just tied to using the contact center to get some money, get a wire transfer done for a customer. It's actually coming into the contact center to impersonate, to get data to go after the C-suite or go after regular employees as well. And traditional, traditional measures, they fail for several reasons. And I've already talked about KBA or knowledge-based authentication. That's just that works on a Boolean yes or no answer. You know the data, you don't. But the basis of it is that the data is secret and it's no longer secret. So this binary pass-fail that we have without understanding context today is the wrong way to authenticate these people. And those systems just can't distinguish between a legitimate caller who's flustered and can't remember information and a sophisticated fraudster who has 80% of the information right. And so we address this through identity assurance, looking at the complete context of an interaction, not just isolated data points like the last 4 of your social. And it's about understanding behavior patterns, device intelligence, right? Is this device a good device? Is it on the network at the time? Has it been jailbroken or rooted? Do they have other apps from this organization? Can we leverage those apps? Have they been used recently? There's a lot of things that we put together into this risk profile that the user doesn't get burdened by. They don't even know it's happening, but we're able to almost immediately put a risk score to this transaction. And then we can step up as necessary. We can do voice authentication. We can do deepfake detection. We can actually do deepfake detection while they're just having a conversation without them even knowing it's happening, looking for those signals that indicate, for example, a synthetic voice has been generated. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context to where I see the problem and how, I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit as to how we try to solve it.
Absolutely. And I have an ask the audience question as well. You just went through a number of ways that fraudsters can exploit a contact center. So I'm just curious from the audience, how confident are you that your current security measures can address today's fraud tactics? And I'm curious if any of our members of the audience have any feedback on that, on if their current security measures can prevent fraud. I'll have to check the chat too. I see a koala in the chat. Angelica says she's Googling koala fingerprints right now.
On behalf of Dan, for the best question, we'll send a koala to the person who asked the best question.
Yes, we'll have Q&A at the end. I don't see any answers to the Ask the Audience question, but if anyone has any feedback later on, please let us know. But in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and move on. My final question in this section is, and you kind of already explored this, but talking about social engineering, how do fraudsters leverage social engineering to bypass identification protocols? And then I guess the question is, what red flags can agents be trained to recognize?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I often use the expression, we've had machines hack machines, we've had people hack machines. We're entering the world of machines hacking people, which we'll cover. But social engineering is actually the art of hacking humans, often by other humans, right? And so when you think of it in those terms, and fraudsters have become absolutely masterful at it. They really have. And so here's a couple of techniques. Some people probably know these, but these are some of the common techniques they would deploy here. One is emotional manipulation. We've talked about that, creating scenarios designed to create emotional stress on the agent, right? So sound of a baby crying, or, it's a medical emergency, the empathy play around, extreme distress, danger, something's going wrong, please help me, please help me. Another one is authority exploitation. Do you know who I am? How dare you? Especially in certain industries where the customers have a lot of impact on the business. Think of wealth management, things like that. People they adopt this tone of, extreme authority, and I'm going to call your supervisor. I know the CEO. I know this, and that creates on a poor agent. That creates an awful burden of, oh my God, how do I deal with this? Then we have the false trust building. They're kind of like, hey, how's it going? The friendliness, and you haven't told me about a day. Oh my God, I had such a day today, and you kind of begin to feel like you're almost becoming friends with them. So these are all standard stuff. That these techniques, information mining, right? This is particularly insidious, I guess, and hard to deal with, because they start with information they already have, perhaps from a data breach, all right? And then they'll seem to legitimize themselves by sharing that straight away. So now oh yeah, of course, it must be the real person. It must be Megan. She just volunteered information. I didn't even ask her yet. No, I'm calling from my home address. It's on file. Here it is. 1234 Main Street, whatever it is. And our studies have shown that when you volunteer information that you haven't been asked for, the agent automatically goes, oh my God, this person is the real person, right? They begin to trust that data because they're hearing it without actually making it a Q&A thing. So those are some of the techniques. The red flags we should be trained to recognize, obviously, are pressure and urgency. Any caller creating artificial time pressure, I need it done right now, this is an emergency. I'm not saying you don't serve them, because that would be the wrong approach, because it could be an emergency, but you gotta treat it as you got to treat it through a different process now. You got to say, okay, I might be being phished here. I might be phished, voice phishing. I've got to now deploy some extra things here. I got to be aware of it, right? So and there's again, we talk about some of these techniques. There's things you can do very easily to validate that call, to validate a caller without putting undue inconvenience on them. Another one is look for unusual request patterns. Multiple calls about the same account. If you're able to see, for example, that somebody's called in under this number against this account, 5 times today already, that's a flag. They may be trying to get to this may be the more data gathering, or it may be actually be an attack on that account. So you just either calling from the same number or inquiring about the same account number. So I would look for that. Information inconsistencies, behavioral red flags. Sometimes these background noises, they don't sound. It's the example would be if you can hear a baby crying clearly 1 minute and then a train the next minute, or in the same conversation, that you're unlikely to they're not distinct, right? So you'd have heard the train or the traffic while the baby was crying in the first case. So sometimes you see some I call it amateur hour shenanigans by fraudsters, where they press buttons, but they don't map to the actual the mind's eye of the context that the person that's calling in should be in at that point. So. These are little things, the deflection tactics. If you ask a verification question and they try to deflect the answer, they should know it, but they're like, oh, I've been a customer of yours for 20 years. This is very insulting. How dare you? Or look, my husband's very sick. I don't have time for this BS. These are distraction techniques, deflection techniques, because they don't have the answer. And so I think that's another red flag that you should, again, be very careful going forward. And this is going to sound a little bit controversial, but it's learning to say no. It's actually, as call center agents, your job is to help these people. But if there are sufficient red flags, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, for example, Megan, there's a couple of things I need to be clear on here, because you're asking me to do something for you that's very, very risky. And so I'm just going to, if you don't mind, to protect you, right, I'm going to ask for some other stuff. I'm going to send you a message now, and I need you to, for example, take a picture of your driver's license for your security. It's going to come from this number, or it's going to, the mobile app on your phone is going to pop up, and I need you just to confirm the transaction on the phone, right? And you can do that very simply, but you frame it as, I'm helping you, right? And if they say, oh, hang on a second, this is a new phone, immediate red flag. Because I can see it through the continuity solution, I can see that you actually logged into the mobile app, or you called in from this phone 2 hours ago, right? Did you just switch your phone in the last 2 hours? It doesn't make sense, right? So you should be getting that push notification, right? And if they say, well, no, I'm calling, it's weird, my phone's all screwed up, it's because you're spoofing the header record, you're spoofing the phone number, right? You're not actually calling from Megan's phone, which has other assets on it that we can use to, frictionlessly authenticate you. So those are the kind of things you should do to deal with those things. So.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like there's things we can do on the back end in terms of technology, and also areas where we can train our agents. Great. All right, let's move on to our next section, which is the impact of AI on fraud. And my first question for you, Connor, is how is the rise of synthetic voices and deep fakes reshaping the threat landscape for contact centers?
So this is, as a person who's been doing AI since, I did it in college actually, but long time ago now. But this is where it gets really interesting, really for me as a technologist. And I'll be very frank, we're in a technological arms race that's moving faster than most organizations can realize, and definitely faster than most organizations can adapt to. The rise of synthetic voices, deep fake generation, it really represents a fundamental shift in the threat landscape, and it's happening at a pace that's staggering. Would you mind just jumping forward one slide? Yeah. So I'll just put this up for a second. This slide's out of date. I don't like using out of date slides, but I can't keep up anymore. This is from, I think, end of June. And you can see here in these 5 columns, this is software that's available today, right, that can help you generate deepfake voices, deepfake identity documents, and so on. So, and it's growing every day, right? And so you need assets to protect against this. This is probably, when I was at a conference last week, and I put this up on the screen, and almost everybody in the audience actually took out their phones and started taking pictures of it. And I'm like, hang on, people, you're the good guys. You're not supposed to be using these tools to generate these things. You're supposed to be defending against these. And this is what we do. This is what, from an AI perspective, this is what we bring to the table. But it's interesting that we're seeing a democratization, if you like, or the access to the tech that you need to perpetrate fraud has become easy. It's no longer a problem from a software perspective. The other thing is, for those of you who are into AI, this little box here is NVIDIA's latest. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, calls it a desktop AI supercomputer. This is my own personal device. I got it at the weekend, and that can do a petaflop, which is 10 to the power of 15 floating point operations a second. So to train these models, I don't need OpenAI or Anthropic or anything like that. I mean, I can do this in a data center. The phrase I like to do when we talk about AI is, last year's supercomputer is this year's desktop. And we're seeing a commoditization of the software and the hardware at an unbelievably fast pace. And that's really something that people need to be aware of. And as an organization, you cannot solve this problem yourself. You need to we need as an industry to come together to create the signals, to create the products that are needed to defeat these guys, because they can move so much faster than a call center or any firm today. And you can create realistic sounding voices in 3 to 5 seconds, right, of audio, realistic to a human, right, but not to an AI deep fake detector like we bring to market, because we can look for those things that are not quite human, that the human ear doesn't pick up on. We see it in the voice signal that's coming in. We marry that with the device intelligence, the network forensic intelligence, the pattern, the identity intelligence that we collected over the last series of sequence of interactions to flag it if it's a problem. And so I think I read somewhere that the recent average cost of a deepfake attack in 2024 was about $500,000 per incident. So they're going after the high net worth, but because it's becoming much easier to get to the tech, to get to the, they're being able to lower that down now to lower value transactions. So we're going to see a lot more of them, but at a lower value, right? Actually, I don't know if anybody saw this morning. It was on the American news media, but last night in the UK, there's a program in a channel called Channel 4, and they have like 60 minutes. Their version is called Dispatches. It's investigative journalism, and they had a program about an hour long that talked about, it was a 1 hour documentary on the future of jobs in the AI era, and a lot of people joined in. They wanted to see, well, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to be out of work, or have to change careers? And at the end of it was a brilliantly done presentation. At the end of it, the presenter walking down the street says, "Oh, and by the way, none of this is real. I am fake. Everybody in this video has been fake. Every conversation, and it's now people are beginning to realize, oh my God." So that was generated by an entire 1 hour documentary that's a deep fake. Now, it's not a nefarious deep fake, but it talks to the future of Hollywood and why they're concerned. It talks to the future of TV and film and media. But look at that tech and look how well that was applied, and think about it in the terms of the Contact Center and the organization in the next 2 to 3 years, right? You cannot fight these AI-powered attacks unless you have AI-powered defenses. That is the key message. So.
Wow, that's incredible. And I did not see the news about that documentary, but I'll definitely have to look that up after this. It sounds really,
I think
really
I can probably post, if I have a minute at the end, I can post in the chat the link to YouTube. It's a 30-second, I think, summary of it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try and find that when we get a break here.
Yeah, I would love to look at that. That seems very interesting. And then talking about limitations, Connor, what limitations do current biometric or do current voice biometrics rather face when they're confronted with high quality AI generated speech?
Great question. And we advocate for it's not a single, there's no single perfect security system, whether it's voice, face, passwords, even crypto keys, right? So, but if you look at voice specifically, I think there's a couple of areas that you need to be concerned about. First of all is environmental vulnerability. They can be sensitive to background noise and conditions, and they can generate loud background noise, right? To try and create break the system, say, oh, it's not going enough data to really differentiate your voice, so we'll just turn it off and not use it, right? And we'll go to some other technique that's maybe not as good. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. What? Yes, there's a train in the background. I'm hitting the train button, right, over and over. Sorry, say again. And the system's saying it doesn't have enough data. So the agent's like, well, what do I do here? They switch to a KBA. All right, you know what? Tell me what the last 4 of your social is. Oh yeah, no problem. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that's one. We're starting to see now replay and synthetic voice attacks. And a lot of the current voice biometric systems, I call them voice version 1.0. They're not built to detect those, right? And people still have those deployed in their contact centers. So simple replay using recorded audio, text-to-speech AI models, these kind of things. You really need what I call voice 2.0 to address these challenges. It has to be an AI, designed to counter common AI threats, like looking for the artifacts in the voice sample that are indicative of it's being generated by a synthetic generator. Looking for, one of the things we do is when with our customers, when I record, for example, if somebody's trying to impersonate me and they've recorded my voice, they'll play it from a speaker, which will have a slightly different signature going into the microphone than my own, thick kind of American Irish accent has. Slightly different, enough that we can pick up, and in some cases identify the microphone, the speaker that's being used to generate the output that's going into the microphone. It's fascinating stuff from a data science perspective. But part of this is how do we solve some of these problems? And I talk, to me, it's one of the issues with voice is the identity binding problem at the start. When I register my voice, there's no authoritative system to measure it against. If I call in and I use my KPA, my last 4 of my social, my password, and so on, and they say, all right, well, I've got your voice recorder. Would you like to use that in the future? Yeah. I've now created a trust my voice to weak data that was used, that had been compromised in the first place, right? So I've basically taken over the account with strong biometrics, but on an account by using weak data in the contact center. So we solved that identity binding problem by, again, bringing other things to bear. For example, we could look at the signaling from the device. Has this person called in multiple times? Is this device been ported recently in the network? Is it in a transaction? Is it in a call right now? Okay, so now we got a good level of trust on that. It's a high net worth person, for example, and it's going to be very risky. Well, we'll ask them, we're going to send them a link, and we're going to ask them to, take a selfie and take maybe a picture of their driver's license. And we can check the data on both of those, make sure it's live, make sure the integrity of the driver's license is good by checking different systems. And then we can bind that voice to the identity, right? And now we've actually stepped up. One time, we've gone through a 30-second to 45-second step-up process, and we've really created that trusted vault around that customer's identity using multiple different things. And so that helps solve that problem as well. So there are things we can do. I would say the biggest problem with voice 1.0 today is it's not built for the AI era. But the good news is there are voice 2.0 products available that can help.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section just for the interest of time.
Yeah, I realize. So sorry, I talked too much about the AI side. I'm sorry, I'll be quicker.
No, this is fascinating. I mean, I think we could have a 90-minute discussion on this. Or maybe you'll just have to come back on another webinar and answer more questions and talk about this stuff in a little more detail. All right, so talking about just finally kind of wrapping up our third and final section here, how to balance security and customer experience. So what are techniques that maintain a low friction experience for legitimate customers, making it as easy as possible for legitimate customers to do their transactions?
Absolutely. So this is where the rubber meets the road from an organizational perspective, right? Because we can't balance security with experience, we lose the customer while we're trying to protect them, right? And so the key insight for me is that not all customers and not all transactions carry the same risk. So we shouldn't treat them the same way, right? So for example, we should adopt risk-based adaptive authentication techniques. And this is foundational to the modern enterprise. Instead of applying the same security to every transaction and every interaction, we assess the risk in real time and apply appropriate friction and controls. A known customer calling from the registered device about a routine question should get minimal friction, right? The same customer calling from a new location, right, asking to wire money to a new account should get a lot more scrutiny and some stepped up authentication. And this approach can reduce friction by 70, 80, 90% for low risk transactions while increasing security for those high risk ones. We talked a little bit already today about passive biometrics and silent signals, right? So these are absolutely game-changing in my opinion. So voice authentication 2.0, where we're doing deepfake detection, we're doing risk signaling, we're combining it with other things we're getting from the cellular network and the customer's previous history. We're not actually impacting them in any way, right, in terms of friction, but we're bringing together a lot more signaling into a risk profile of the person and the interaction that allows us to quickly adapt, right? So that's very, very important. Device intelligence, environmental context, passive voice analysis. I would say the other thing is continuous authentication. We've seen examples where our customers have brought us in because they would have somebody, I could call you, for example, ask you to authenticate to the IVR. I say I come from company A, I'd ask you to authenticate to the IVR. You would go through the process of authenticating for your security. I would step that up as I'm doing that for you. And then as soon as you're authenticated, I would disconnect you from the call, take over the call, and hit 0 for an agent. Now the agent will get, oh, she's already authenticated in the call, in the IVR, so I don't need to go through the same due diligence. So there's not automatic trust there, right? And so the agent starts talking to me and helping me. We should be doing voice biometrics at the IVR engagement level, and when we change the channel to an agent to revalidate real quickly without any friction, quite frankly, that it's the same person. So I call that call splicing, and we've seen examples of that actually happen and very successfully at some of our customers, and we've been able, once they brought us in, we've been able to stop that. And so that's another thing that should be done. So it's continuous adaptive authentication at all points in the interaction.
I love that. And I think that goes the same for conversation intelligence as well. I think customers expect that the agent has full context of the conversation if they were speaking to another agent or perhaps a virtual bot before them. So I think that goes for identification as well. Great. Awesome. I want to leave time for some questions. I know I saw a few questions in the chat, so let's go ahead and move on to Q&A before we wrap today. We do have some time for maybe like 2 or 3 questions, and I did see them in here. So let me see. And if you do have questions just for the audience, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we will try to get to them or get to them after the webinar. All right. So the first question I see here is, how can we train our reps to detect a fraudster calling? I know you went through numerous tips on this, but maybe if there's like 1 or 2 high impact that they should focus on, what would those be?
So the question, just remind me again, it's about what steps should they do to minimize?
Yeah, how can we train? So how can they improve training for their agents to detect fraudster calling?
Okay, yeah. So there's 2 things. First of all, it's going to sound self-serving, but use technology, right, to do what the human can't do, which is pick up on synthetic voices, pick up on synthetically generated media that is being used. Secondly is train them on the core techniques I outlined earlier, right? Which is look for urgency, and is it real urgency? Is it artificial urgency? And then be very wary of kind of pressure. Always, am I being put under pressure by this person? Are they creating? And if they are, remind them that you're here to serve, you're here to help them, but you also need to protect them, right, and protect their account. And then at the same time, you can ask some extra questions. Again, like, by the way, let's say it's a bank, you have our mobile app. Do you mind if I just send you a quick push notification on the app, right? And then if you just confirm that it's you, right? That's a simple thing to do. It's much easier, for example, than me asking you a bunch of questions. And if they say, oh, no, I don't have time for that. Well, but you're calling from that phone, right? So it's on your phone. You surely, that's a red flag. To me, that's not an immediate fraud attack, right? Because clearly it's not the right person. So I would say that there's the simple answer is to watch for urgency, watch for kind of creating crisis on you, the agent, and then become more of a robot yourself in terms of like how you react to it, and follow the script that we would be happy to work with that person to outline some of those techniques in more detail, to even run some simulations and talk to them about how they should deal with it, and then show them how by leveraging technology and the training, you can really, really change the dynamic of how these people try to get in and how successful they're not as a result.
Great. And the next question I received in the Q&A box is pretty interesting. So it says, what steps should contact centers take to mark their security steps as authentic? We've received many complaints that our security steps, biometric authentication, are too similar to fraud requests. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It's very interesting. I'd like to know more. It's hard to answer that question because I don't know what their steps are. If they're calling out to people and they're asking to provide that data, that's a concern, right? So then I would be obviously reticent to, oh, hi, this is, this is Bank A, my name is such and such, and I'm calling you to authenticate you because we've got an issue on your account, right? And and obviously I would be very wary of that. So the first thing you would do is hang up the phone and call back on a number I trust, as opposed to, even if it's the same number that they used to call me, because in the same way that I can spoof somebody's phone number or try to impersonate their phone number, these organizations now, these hackers are starting to impersonate impersonate legitimate enterprises by spoofing their number. There are techniques to get around that, and we can certainly talk about that. There's protocols like Store Shaken here in the US, and there's so it's phone number authentication, if you like, endpoint authentication in the phone call. It works both ways, both from the caller perspective and from the organizational perspective. I think other than that, I really need to know more, because I don't understand the context of why they would be reaching out to somebody to authenticate, proactively. It should be done as part of the account creation process, right, where they register the first time, or should be done as part of a customer initiated process when they call in. There's an automatic distrust of somebody calling out to do that, I would think. So
yeah, maybe it's something in the workflow that could be improved or optimized.
and it reminds me of one thing, if you don't mind, Megan, real quickly. I mean, today the people who are in charge of fraud are generally separate from the people who are in charge of customer service, right? And they have different, if I'm running a customer service thing, customer sat scores are my number one thing, right? I'm trying to do that. If I'm head of fraud, I'm like, oh my God, we're losing all this money, right? And and so there is an argument that I would make today that these should be sort of unified under a chief trust officer. I know we have so many chief dis officers these days, but a chief identity and trust officer. That a lot of organizations who think that way will actually unify these things, and they'll be able to balance one against the other, and they'll be able to come up with the optimal experiences. Just a thought that, I'd be curious what the audience thinks of that, because I do see when we talk to our customers, our clients, that we have two different sometimes stakeholders to talk to. The people who want to use our technology to make it more easy and convenient to authenticate people, and the people who are dragging us in because they want to stop the fraud. The great thing is, but like they're unified at the end point, but they have different lenses, and therefore they're looking at it from a slightly different perspective, which can create for the user, the customer, end customer, some friction.
Yeah. Is there, I'm just curious, Connor, is there a metric that contact centers can track to track, the prevention of fraud while improving the customer experience? Does that exist at all?
There's about 20 of them, right? Fraud loss rate, false decline rate, fraud detection rates, time to detection is actually quite important. Cost per fraud incident, right? And then, and the things we help them focus on is authentication completion rates, so, how can people follow the process? Have you optimized it so that you can authenticate them? So that if they choose not to go through the authentication process, it's likely because they're a fraudster, because that 99.5% of people can get through this no problem, right? So those are the kind of things I would look for. The customer effort score, which is kind of how much do they have to go through to prove their identity, and one of that's really, really important to us is net promoter score, and for people, I'm sure most people know what this is, but it's the likelihood that I would recommend a good or service from an organization to my friends, right? And what we've seen is that 30 to 40% of the net promoter score, right, which is the overall customer satisfaction, is driven by the authentication process, right, and the friction that's put into it, and the ease at which we do that. So that's something that our technology we think is really, really good at. It's really good at removing the friction while increasing the trust, and therefore increasing the net promoter score.
All right, that's probably all the questions that we have time for today. So I'll go ahead and start to wrap up here. So if you've enjoyed the conversation today, check out our learning center. It's just learn.callminer.com. We have a ton of content on that learning center, data sheets, white papers that you can dive into there. And so with that, I will hand it back over to Angelica to wrap up the webinar today.
Thanks, Megan. All right, before anybody goes, I just have a couple of quick important reminders. First, please be on the lookout for an email from us with a link to the recording of today's session. You can watch it on demand. Like I said previously, it'll bring you right back to this console that you see in front of you. You can find those additional resources. You can review the recording. You can speed it up, slow it down, whatever you want to do. All right, second, if you are interested, like Megan said, you can access more resources like case studies, webinar recordings, white papers, etc. in our learning center at learn.callminer.com. And then finally, if you enjoyed what you saw today, you may be interested in our next webinar, Mastering the Future of Proactive Customer Engagement. And that is going to be Thursday, October 23rd. You can register for that by visiting our website at callminer.com/events. All right. Megan and especially Connor, thank you so much to the both of you for the energy and insights you brought to today's conversation. It was fascinating. And to everybody in the audience, thank you once more for taking time to attend today. We hope that you found this information valuable, and we look forward to seeing you at our next one. Take care, everyone, and farewell.
Thank you.